the auspices of the United Nations, Britain and Netherlands hold a conference today to seek final funds for a safer tanker. Prisoners released recently from Houthi prisons suffer critical health conditions. The United Nations envoy Hans Gomberg concludes visit to the interim capital, Aden. Welcome to Yemen Today TV. This is the English news with me, Roshan Fouad. The UN aims to raise the final $29 million necessary on Thursday in order to start extracting 1.1 million barrels of oil from a decaying warship stranded off the war-torn Yemeni coast and avert an environmental catastrophe. The following report has more details.
On Thursday, the United Nations hopes to gather the last $29 million required to begin recovering 1.1 million barrels of oil from a rotting vessel stranded off the coast of war-torn Yemen and prevent an environmental disaster. For years, United Nations authorities have warned that the safer tanker might leak 4 times as much oil as the 1989 Exxon Valdez catastrophe off the coast of Alaska. A UN proposal to unload the oil requires $129 million, which involves the purchase of a huge ship, the price of which has risen owing to the conflict in Ukraine. Governments, individual donations, and crowdsourcing have contributed around $99 million. The United Nations announced Thursday that a pledge event co-hosted by the United Kingdom and the Netherlands intends to raise the remaining $29 million. A tanker, the Nautica, was procured by the UN in March and set sail from China in early April. According to the United Nations, the operation cannot be funded by the sale of oil because it is unclear who owns it. In 2015, war suspended maintenance work on the Safer. The United Nations has warned that its structural integrity has deteriorated dramatically and that it is on the verge of rupture. Yemen has been at war since the Iran-aligned Houthi militia overthrew the government in the capital Sana'a in late 2014. A year later, a military coalition led by Saudi Arabia intervened to restore the government. Peace measures have gained traction after Riyadh and Tehran decided in March to restore diplomatic relations that had been cut in 2016. In April, a Saudi team traveled to Sana'a to negotiate a durable ceasefire. More talks, according to the Houthi officials, will take place after the Eid al-Fitr holiday, which took place 2 weeks ago. This week, UN Special Envoy to Yemen, Hans Gomberg, is visiting Yemen and the region.
The U.S. State Department said on World Press Freedom Day they honor the hard work of journalists that is critical to empowering other human rights. These rights include providing information on health, the environment, and political processes, a space for public participation and debate, as well as revealing corruption and human rights abuses. Reporters Without Borders said that Yemen is still one of the most dangerous countries in the world for the safety of journalists. On World Press Freedom Day, Reporters Without Borders released its annual ranking of press freedom in the countries of the world according to the World Press Freedom Index. According to the classification, which included 180 countries, it was found that the situation is very good in 8 countries and problematic in 55 countries, including Yemen. The health of the released detainees from the Houthis prisons has been deteriorated due to the suffering and torture they encountered. The following report gives more details.
Survivors from the Houthi prisons have seen their health deteriorate as a result of the physical and psychological torture they suffered while in detention. Medical sources in Ma'rib reveal that journalists Tawfiq al-Mansouri and Harith Hamid were transferred to hospital after their health deteriorated days after their release from Houthi prison in a prisoner swap with the Yemeni government last month. A government official confirmed in a statement that the journalists suffered from brutal torture over the years. He added war crimes, the psychological and physical torture, neglect and lack of health care that hundreds of politicians, media professionals, journalists and other civilians are being subject to in the Houthi jails and detention centers. The government called on the international community, United Nations, United Special Envoy to Yemen, and human rights organizations to pressure the Houthis to halt their systematic torture of detainees and to release all prisoners in swap deal, while ensuring that those involved are held accountable. Right organizations reports documented the killing of 7 civilians who were kidnapped and tortured in Houthi detention centers in 2022. They accused the group of crimes of torture against 120 abductees, as well as the killing of around 300 civilians abductees under torture in Houthi camps since the beginning of their coup.
The World Bank published a report on breaking the cycle of food crisis in Yemen, where food insecurity is one of the most pressing challenges. Yemen has suffered from a series of food crises, and climate change increases the risk of more crises. The World Bank says a food security crisis preparedness plan has been put in place to mitigate the impact of future food crises.
So they're giving you nutrition for him?
قالوا لي استلمي له ما عنده ديله اتيته بطاقه الاسبوع يبون 15 ودحين تركه مدري هي يهبون له مدري لا يا صعب علينا بعض الحين نحصل له حتى 10 ريال والله معانا قال له حقه من نشتري.
And what's the problem with his hands? What happened?
ياكلها بس نعرف لما يسيل الدم.
Oh my gosh, it's red raw. Why is he eating his fingers?
ياكلها بنفسه كذا يمسكها وياكلها لما يسيل الدم.
A soldier was killed and another was wounded in an attack carried out by a Houthi drone on government forces positions on Harib front in Ma'rib. A military source confirmed that the government forces had earlier pushed units of their forces to a front north of Harib to secure the first line of defense. The Houthi militia bombed the vehicles of the company executing Al-Qada Road project west of Taz. The project targeted Kilo 7 in the middle of the project, near the entrance to the offices and housing to the project of workers. As a result, 3 equipments were damaged, which are buckets and bulldozers, in addition to stopping work and the material damage it would cause to the project. The UN envoy to Yemen, Hans Gomberg, arrived in Sana'a Monday within the international efforts to support the Saudi and Omani mediation to achieve lasting peace in Yemen. This report has more details.
The United Nations envoy to Yemen, Hans Grandberg, outlined the Yemeni agreement he pursued to conclude after holding forthright, detailed and constructive discussions on the way forward with the Houthis in Sana'a. Afterwards, Grandberg headed to Aden to meet with the head of the Presidential Leadership Council, Rashad Al-Alimi, and briefed him on the results of his recent meetings. Al-Alimi welcomed the statement of the United Nations Security Council, calling for engagement in good faith in peace efforts, stressing the need for any negotiation process based on agreed terms of reference, particularly the relevant Security Council resolutions. And he affirmed that the government's commitment to supporting the envoy's efforts and regional and international mediators, accusing Houthi militia of not being ready for peace. As it was clear in the stampede disaster in Sana'a that killed dozens of poor people looking for any humanitarian aid to survive. He called on international community to pressure the Houthi militia to fulfill its obligations under the Stockholm Agreement, including visits to detention facilities and revealing the fate of thousands of abductees and disappeared persons, and encouraging them to mobilize more than 1 million children into sectarian camps. When Grandberg was in Sana'a within the international efforts to support the Saudi and Omani mediation to achieve lasting peace in Yemen, he indicated that he was encouraged by what he heard and indeed by the constructive engagement by all sides at this critical time. He revealed the broad lines of the agreement he wants to achieve, saying that any deal must deliver tangible benefits for all Yemenis. It should durably stop the violence through a ceasefire that ensures the safety of the Yemeni people, ensure more destinations and flights to and from Sana'a airport, guarantee the smooth and unhindered opening of the Hodeidah port and the resumption of the country's oil exports, opening all government's key roads, paying the public sector salaries regularly. After a year of unprecedented calm in Yemen, the parties need to take the next bold steps toward ending the conflict, providing for the preparation and the resumption of an inclusive Yemeni-owned political process under the United Nations auspices, and only through such a process can Yemenis discuss, debate and decide the terms of reaching a sustainable and just peace.
Coming next. Young entrepreneurs have revived the cultivation of renowned Yemeni coffee. Welcome back. Since 2015, journalists in Yemen have been harassed, persecuted, and psychologically and physically oppressed. The war significantly impacted the Yemeni's political, financial, and social life. On World Press Freedom Day, TAIS holds a symposium to shed light on the violations suffered by journalists across Yemen. This report has more details.
A symposium entitled The Price of the Truth was organized by the Yemeni Journalist Syndicate in TAIS in collaboration with the Media Department of the Faculty of Arts, TAIS University. It was held to commemorate the World Press Freedom Day, which is observed on the 3rd of May of every year. This day is an opportunity to focus on the state of independent journalism and principles of press freedom in Yemen and around the world.
اليوم هي رسالة للسلطات للتحقيق Today is a call to action for policymakers to look into the precarious economic predicament journalists find themselves in and meet their needs. It is also an appeal to the United Nations to focus and support Yemeni journalists who've been wrongfully detained and targeted. It is critical that these journalists receive compensation for this suffering.
Since 2015, journalists in Yemen have been harassed, persecuted, and psychologically and physically oppressed. The war significantly impacted the Yemeni's political, financial, and social life. Out of 45 journalists killed in Yemen, 11 journalists were killed in Taiz, with almost 1,500 violations recorded against media professionals and journalists. In Taiz, around 165 media outlets were shuttered, while 3 media institutions were totally or partially demolished.
الأضرار التي لحقت بالمؤسسات الإعلامية في محافظة تعز وهي أهم 3 مؤسسات.
The battle had an effect on a number of Yemeni organizations, including Al Jumhuriya, Sabah News Agency, and Taiz Broadcasting. The infrastructure has sustained $414 million in total damages. Statistics indicate that 11 journalists and reporters have died in Taiz, which is a significant number.
Female journalists in Yemen experience additional harassment, which impedes their work and prevents them from performing their duties normally, and often prompts them to abandon the field altogether.
الحديث عن عمل الصحفيات اليمنيات في بيئة معقدة.
Female journalistic work in a war-torn environment such as Yemen is subject to prevalent patriarchal bias and discrimination. Women have a hard time working in the field due to societal constraints.
Journalism remains a profession fraught with dangers, driving many Yemeni journalists to move abroad to work more freely or to somewhat safer Yemeni governorates that could offer security and stability for them and their families.
The UNICEF announced the arrival of a cargo plane at Aden International Airport carrying 2.7 million doses of life-saving vaccines to protect Yemeni children from diseases. The organization said that a UNICEF cargo plane recently arrived at Aden International Airport carrying 2.7 million doses of life-saving vaccines. It added that these vaccines will help protect 200,000 Yemeni children under 2 years of age from preventable diseases. UNICEF conducted training on community engagement and AAP for frontline workers and cluster members in Aden. This came to ensure quality support delivered by UNICEF partners, and the training will help to equip them with the required knowledge on AAP principles. War has been raging in Yemen for 8 years, decimating the country's economy. Unexpectedly, entrepreneurial spirit in Yemen is flourishing, especially in the coffee sector. This report has more details.
When the war in Yemen broke out in March 2015, the country was plunging into a profound crisis. One unexpected positive side of the war, however, is that it has led to a remarkable flourishing of entrepreneurial spirit. After all, Yemen's young people have had to find ways to secure a future for themselves. In the process, they have rediscovered an ancient trade and one of the main pillars of the national economy, which is coffee. Once upon a time, Yemeni coffee enjoyed a reputation for quality and international distribution. For decades, coffee was synonymous with the country's national wealth. From the late 14th century onwards, Yemen presided over the secrets of growing coffee, leading the world in its cultivation and export to international markets, from the port of Mekha in western Yemen. Since the end of the 20th century, however, and compared with its competitors, Yemen has forfeited much of its former status. According to statistics issued by the Ministry of Industry and Trade, the country ranks 42nd out of 64 coffee exporting countries worldwide. Despite this decline, today's young people are working hard to restore the standing of Yemeni coffee in global markets via a host of projects, from production to export, amid vigorous local efforts and a positive response from Yemeni society as a whole. During the early days of Yemen's civil war, the Small and Micro Enterprise Promotion Service led with the hashtag Yemen Coffee Break campaign. It turned out to be one of its most effective campaigns, promoting young people to think about trying some creative ideas in the coffee sector. Adnan El-Qasus is a young man who thought of this campaign with the intent of supporting the coffee sector by promoting a lot of farmers in multiple locations around Yemen, and by raising awareness of techniques to ensure that coffee is cultivated correctly, thus improving quality.
Here is a reminder of the main headlines. Under the auspices of the United Nations, Britain and Netherlands hold a conference today to seek final funds for safer tanker. Prisoners released recently from healthy prisons suffer critical health conditions. The United Nations envoy Hans Grumberg concludes visit to the interim capital, Aden. This is the end of the news. It was Roshan Fouad. See you soon.